Every single financial decision you make, where to invest, when to buy a house, whether to take on debt, how to position your portfolio, is being shaped by forces most people have never taken 20 minutes to understand. Forces so large and so constant that they feel like weather. You cannot control them, so most people stop trying to understand them. And that is exactly why most people keep getting blindsided by recessions, inflation spikes, interest rate shocks, and market crashes that experts on television act like nobody could have seen coming. The economy is not mysterious. It is not reserved for PhD economists or Wall Street analysts. It runs on a set of principles that are genuinely simple once someone explains them without the jargon. And understanding those principles puts you ahead of the vast majority of people making financial decisions in the dark. My name is Tomas, and this channel is about finance, automation, and building wealth through clarity and strategy. If you are new here, welcome. Hit that like button right now and subscribe so you never miss a video. Today, we are making macroeconomics simple, covering everything you need to understand the economy, how it moves, and how to position your financial life around it, in one single video. Let's get into it. Let us start with the most fundamental question of all, because the answer to this one question explains almost everything else. What is the economy, and what is it actually measuring? The economy, at its most basic level, is the sum total of all the transactions happening between people, businesses, and governments within a given country or region. Every time you buy a coffee, that is a transaction. Every time a company pays an employee, that is a transaction. Every time a government builds a road or a school, that is a transaction. Add all of those transactions together over a year, and you have a measure of economic output called gross domestic product, or GDP. GDP is the scoreboard of the economy. When GDP is growing, more goods and services are being produced, more money is changing hands, more people are employed, and on average, people's standards of living are rising. When GDP is shrinking, which economists call a recession when it happens for 2 consecutive quarters, the opposite is true. Businesses are producing less, employment is falling, and the financial stress on households and companies increases. But GDP is not the only thing worth watching. The economy is better understood as a system with several interconnected gauges, and knowing what each gauge measures and how they relate to each other is what gives you real economic literacy. The key gauges of the economy and what they tell you. The first gauge is inflation. Inflation is the rate at which prices across the economy are rising over time. A small, stable amount of inflation, around 2% annually, is actually the target in most developed economies, because it encourages spending and investment. When prices are expected to rise slightly in the future, people and businesses are incentivized to buy and invest now rather than waiting. The problem comes when inflation rises significantly above that target, as it did in many countries in the early 2020s, because it erodes the purchasing power of money, squeezes household budgets, and creates uncertainty that slows economic activity. The second gauge is employment. The unemployment rate measures the percentage of the labor force that is actively looking for work and cannot find it. Low unemployment generally signals a healthy economy. Businesses are producing enough to hire and pay workers. But there is a nuance here. When unemployment becomes extremely low, wage growth can accelerate faster than productivity, which can become a driver of inflation. This is why central banks pay close attention to the labor market as part of their mandate to manage price stability. The third gauge is interest rates. Interest rates are set by a country's central bank. In the United States, that is the Federal Reserve, and they represent the baseline cost of borrowing money throughout the entire economy. When interest rates are low, borrowing is cheap. Businesses take on loans to invest and expand. Consumers finance homes, cars, and education at affordable rates. Economic activity tends to accelerate. When interest rates are high, borrowing becomes expensive. Business investment slows. Consumer spending on credit tightens, and economic activity tends to decelerate. Interest rates are the single most powerful lever the central bank has for managing the speed of the economy. The economic cycle, why the economy moves in waves, and what each phase means. The expansion phase is when GDP is growing, unemployment is falling, consumer confidence is rising, and business investment is increasing. This is the phase that feels good. Incomes rise, asset prices tend to appreciate, and credit is easy to access. The risk during expansion is complacency, the assumption that growth will continue indefinitely, which leads individuals and institutions to take on more risk than the environment ultimately justifies. The peak is the top of the cycle, the moment where growth is at its strongest, but also where the imbalances that will eventually cause a contraction are most developed. Inflation tends to be elevated at the peak. Asset prices tend to be stretched. Credit conditions are loose. And the central bank is typically raising interest rates to prevent the economy from overheating. The contraction or recession phase follows the peak. Business investment slows. Consumer spending pulls back. Unemployment rises. Credit tightens. Asset prices fall as investors reprice risk. This is the phase that causes the most financial damage for people who were not positioned for it. Overextended on debt, concentrated in overvalued assets, with no cash cushion to absorb the shock. The trough is the bottom of the cycle, the moment of maximum economic pessimism, where unemployment is at its highest and asset prices have fallen their furthest. It is also, historically, the best moment to invest. The fear at the trough is overwhelming, but it is precisely that fear that creates the opportunity because asset prices reflect maximum pessimism rather than realistic long-term value. The recovery phase follows as the central bank cuts interest rates, government stimulus flows into the economy, consumer confidence begins rebuilding, and business hiring resumes. Asset prices begin recovering before the economic data improves, because markets are forward-looking, pricing in expected future conditions rather than current ones. The recovery phase transitions back into expansion, and the cycle repeats. Fiscal policy and monetary policy, the two tools governments use to manage the economy. When the economy moves through its cycle, governments and central banks have two primary tools available to try to smooth out the extremes, to prevent recessions from being too severe and expansions from becoming dangerously overheated. The first tool is monetary policy, the domain of the central bank. By raising or lowering the benchmark interest rate, the central bank makes borrowing more or less expensive throughout the entire economy. Raising rates is the brake pedal. It slows economic activity and reduces inflation. Lowering rates is the accelerator. It stimulates borrowing, spending, and investment. In extreme circumstances, central banks also use tools like quantitative easing, purchasing financial assets directly to inject liquidity into the financial system, to provide additional stimulus when interest rates are already near zero. The second tool is fiscal policy, the domain of the elected government. Fiscal policy refers to government spending and taxation decisions. When the economy is slowing, governments can increase spending on infrastructure, social programs, or direct payments to households to inject demand into the economy. They can also cut taxes, leaving more money in the hands of consumers and businesses to spend and invest. When the economy is overheating, governments can reduce spending or raise taxes to cool demand. The challenge of fiscal policy is political as much as economic. Spending increases and tax cuts are popular, while spending cuts and tax increases are not, which means fiscal policy is often less nimble than monetary policy in responding to economic conditions. How macroeconomics connects directly to your personal financial decisions. Understanding the economic cycle and the tools used to manage it is not academic knowledge for most people. It is directly actionable because virtually every major financial decision is better made with macroeconomic context than without it. When interest rates are rising, the calculus on taking on variable rate debt changes dramatically. A mortgage, a business loan, or a personal credit line priced at a variable rate becomes more expensive every time the central bank raises rates. Understanding that a rate hiking cycle is underway and that rates may rise further before peaking is critical information for anyone considering new debt obligations. When the economy is in the late stages of an expansion, when unemployment is near historic lows, asset prices are elevated, and inflation is running above target, that is the time to be building cash reserves, reducing exposure to the most speculative assets, and paying down variable rate debt rather than taking on more. Not because a recession is guaranteed to arrive on any particular timeline, but because the risk-reward of aggressive financial behavior is less favorable at the peak than at any other point in the cycle. When the economy enters a contraction and asset prices fall, the macroeconomic framework provides the context to understand that this is a normal phase of the cycle, not a permanent new reality, and that continuing to invest consistently through the downturn, rather than selling in fear, is the behavior that produces extraordinary long-term returns for those who can manage the emotional difficulty of doing it. When interest rates begin falling again in the recovery phase, understanding the stimulative effect of lower rates on asset prices, business investment, and consumer spending gives an investor the framework to position ahead of the improvement rather than waiting until the recovery is already priced into markets. The macroeconomy is the water every financial decision swims in. Ignoring it does not protect you from it. It simply means you are being shaped by forces you have never taken the time to understand. And the person who understands those forces, who can read the gauges, identify the cycle phase, and adjust their financial behavior accordingly, has a profound and durable advantage over the vast majority of people making decisions in the dark. So there it is, macroeconomics made genuinely simple. The economy is the sum of all transactions, measured by GDP as its primary scoreboard. The key gauges, inflation, employment, and interest rates, tell you how the engine is running at any given moment. The economic cycle moves through expansion, peak, contraction, and recovery in a pattern that has repeated throughout modern economic history and will keep repeating. Fiscal policy through government spending and taxation, and monetary policy through central bank interest rate decisions are the two tools used to manage the cycle's extremes. And understanding all of it connects directly to your mortgage decisions, your investment timing, your debt management, and your cash positioning at every stage of your financial life. The economy is not something that happens to you. It is something you can learn to navigate. And the person who understands the map always outperforms the person walking without one. If this video finally made the economy click for you, please hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel grow. And if you are not subscribed yet, click that button right now so you never miss what is coming next. See you in the next one.